Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking around. This is the Q&A for French Exit with the director, Azazel Jacobs, and moderator, Peter Debruge. Enjoy.
Hey guys, hey Aza, good to see you again. I'm a big fan of this movie. I hope the crowd liked it too. Since they've seen the film, I wonder if we could maybe start talking about the ending, because the film is, an adaptation of a book by your friend Patrick DeWitt, but you make your biggest departure, I think, in the way you handle the ending. How much do you feel comfortable kind of telling us about your choices there?
Oh yeah, no problem at all. I mean, that was a thing that. So yeah, in the book, it ends with, well, Francis's life ends very, very clearly and visually in the bathtub where she cuts her wrist, and a whole other thing
Covered
that
by
happens.
Lucas's character in the book.
Yeah, the next day, and there's a whole thing with the detectives, and there's a whole other part. And it's true, like that is one of the biggest departures. I couldn't imagine shooting that scene and trying to find the truth in that scene. Like that's something that I really look for, and the idea of the fake blood and all these things. It's something that I just felt like it was. There's no way that I was going to do it justice, and it works in the book because we have our own images of those things, but to kind of fabricate those images and all the fabrication that comes in with making movies and the lights and the PAs and this and this. It was too delicate a moment for me to want to put in the film and to feel like I would be able to respect it accurately. So what that led in, and there was a conversation between Pat and I. It wasn't that he was so much resistant about that. He understood what I was saying, and also he understood like that there was another kind of part in the script at one point where she did go into the bathroom, but we ended before going into the bathroom with him, and that felt like also like a very not an ending for her. So the conversation led into other possibilities, and I saw that there was a scene before she does that where Francis in the book, where she wanders the streets and she has this interaction with this man on the street, and that's really the point. She's going out looking for small Frank, and she's pretty much made her mind up of what she's going to do. And when I read that felt very much like a ending, and in talking with Pat and thinking it through, it felt much more true to what a French exit is, with the idea of saying goodbye leaving without saying goodbye. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is not only cinematic, this answers these things, it's also, it felt true to the title. And I would say it also let me sometimes think that something else happened to her. And that was really helpful, especially as I was falling in love with these characters, and especially with her character. It got too difficult to just kind of really process her death, even though I feel like it is in its title. She talks about doing it. It's very clear if you want it to be clear. And it's a decision that Francis makes, I think, very early on in the film.
Yeah, I think we really do ourselves as an audience get attached to her, and it. I mean, I don't know. Literature and cinema are different things, but these characters come so much to life in the casting you've done for them. So I jumped in with the ending, but let's flash back. Let's flash back to your connection to Patrick, and why you were drawn to adapting this novel with him in the first place.
Well, like you mentioned, Patrick and I have been very close. We made a film 10 years ago called Terry, and that brought us especially close. And since then, we've been sharing work with each other at varying different stages. So French Exit, I was able to read before the book was completely finished, but it was mostly there, and had this immediate reaction. I want to make a movie of this. I can't say that I processed the reasons why, other than it had all this mixture of tones that I felt like I'm always drawn to, this kind of combination of drama and comedy. and at the same time, it was a mixture of tones that I felt like I hadn't seen in other movies, or definitely not in my own films. It also was it was a world. It was completely creating a world, and I come from, maybe because of just the size of the films that I've made in the past, but creating that world in a very, very small bubble. And this, it broke out of that bubble pretty early after the first act, and that was something that I felt challenged and excited by doing. I just found it. I was very moved by it. I laughed so much, and I wanted to be in this world. I really wanted to spend more time after reading the book. I wanted to be with these people.
I love the language of the novel, and so much of that, comes through in the characters. I mean, their dialogue is really difficult, I feel like, and not only do they have to deliver that, but they have to create characters who plausibly kind of like are that eloquent, and were sometimes it's not maybe they most tactful question, but were Michelle and Lucas your first choices for these roles? I mean, they're great.
Yeah, so I've gotten into this trick for myself when I'm working on a project, to picture actors that you can't ever work with, right? So I pictured Betty Davis, and like, just not gonna happen, right? It's just, I mean, the technology's not there where we get to yet. I'm sure tomorrow that'll be possible. So that's what I had. I had like different people from films of a whole other era, or different ideas of these things.
Well, tell us who, just so that we have an idea, because that's kind of a fun image. Who did you imagine then in your fantasy, maybe their dead casting of the two characters?
Well, there was a Kay Francis retrospective, who is a kind of, how would you describe, Peter? You'd have a better way to describe Kay Francis, because she was, I saw her in so many films. She's maybe most notably now in Trouble in Paradise, the Lubitsch film. Yeah. She just pops up in so many films. It turns out that she was a huge, huge star for a while. She's definitely not a star in the way that Betty Davis is now. I wound up reading quite a lot about her, and finding out just she was a vaudeville person. Just she was very, very tough, and she wound up actually controlling her contract. It was the only person that fought against these horrible men that were running these studios, and
well, really I didn't know that about her. Okay.
Yeah, completely independent. And she died in 1960 something with $5 million, which is kind of not what happened to any of most of these actors, and especially female actors they just got, at a certain point, they got kind of thrown away, and unless they made it a huge, huge amount of money, they really were left destitute too. So this completely had to do with her being in control of, and then when she saw that the parts were going to a certain direction, she produced, she wrote, she got writers, she really created, and then when that was going away, she stepped away from the whole thing and she left them. And so that strength was something that gave me, when I read about this and saw these movies that she was in, that was the spirit of Francis that I wanted. It was very different, super glamorous. It's not a person that I know in my life, but it was like, I want that spirit. I want the ability to go, okay. And I knew, to go my own way. And I knew with this film being so particular, knowing that it's only going to be for certain people and it's not going to be for other people, and to be strong about that, I needed that courage. That courage was contagious, from both Kay Francis and then Francis Price. I have to say that with, God, I'm trying to remember with Malcolm, in a weird way, started with like Matty Plumpa from the Kaurismäki films. Much older, but somebody that sleeps in his clothes and has greasy hair, and basically watches, and he's watching and he's taking in and he's looking. And the other person was Tati, like Hulo, like, and again, not the right age. Clearly, it's not like, but it was a way that I could see, okay, that's my way in, and that those were both people that I wound up in films that I wound up sharing with Lucas Hedges to help with his way in as well.
I love that though, because it says a lot about how I do think there are some writers who will write specifically for an actor, or, you know, it's like that becomes a limitation. And I really believe in, you know, limitations inspiring creativity. But in the case of like creating characters that then the actors have to you know, to extend themselves to embody is really interesting. And then of course both actors, Lucas and Michelle, bring so much of their own charm to the equation, you know, because what you've described are, you know, characters who could be potentially kind of off-putting or abrasive, and these two are just, you know, people we love and respect and we warm to. And you know, that's important because there's a social barrier, there's an economic, you know, a class barrier there between, I think, the audience and potentially these characters.
Yeah.
You know, it would be easy to resent them, and yet I think you bring us in right away.
Well, and to be completely honest, the moment that I met the two of them, I became completely fixated and tried to do everything I can to win them over. Like suddenly there was no plan B, or if this doesn't work out, like this had to be these people, and I had to do whatever I could to try to woo them into this. So that immediately disappeared. So, and then that may be because of what you're talking about, that there was, these are hard characters to crack. And because I had such an immediate reaction to both Michelle and to Lucas in terms of just wanting to work with them, wanting to be in their presence, wanting to learn from them, I think may hopefully, you know, transferred over to the characters they're portraying as well.
What was it like directing them? I mean, talk about working with Michelle on this. You know, it's like, I feel like we don't see her enough on screen these days. And so I don't know if she's being very selective, if you had to sort of win her over, or
Oh yeah. I had to go, and she says it was immediate, that she was saying yes from the moment. That's not the way that I remember. I remember going more than once, getting Patrick to fly over to Los Angeles, you know, before walking into the room, just saying to Pat, don't fuck this up. Just don't fuck this up. This is like, just do what you're, just don't say the wrong thing, you know? Like I was very, very much wanting to, I mean, it felt like a thing that I just, it was so clear to me that she was the right person, and I wanted to be that clear to her. She says that now, like, oh, I love the script, I love you, I love your work. But the work that I do, you know, for so long, it's weird work, you know, it's really not for everybody. So you just don't know how it's going to be. I mean, the nice thing about, I did know that she loved the script and she loved the book. And I felt like that was a weird litmus test already. Like, okay, if she responds to that, then we're already talking about two people that kind of see humor is in a similar way, and we're attracted to similar things.
Yeah.
So so there was that. I would say that working with the two of them was completely different than each other, and that goes the same with all the other actors. They all had such their own way, that they're all seasoned and experienced and have their own their own way of approaching the way they're having conversations. And that's one of the exciting things about directing, is that you learn all these different languages, and you're trying to shape, you know, you're trying to use all these different tones within the frame, and these people represent all these different tones of themselves and how you communicate with them. Michelle was super precise and detail oriented. She went back to the book. And we all loved the book, so we clung to the book as a certain testament. But she would go back and read the scenes, and we go back to what the scene was in the book and talk about the differences, the changes that were made. Because I had worked very closely with Pat on the adaptation, I could answer a lot of those questions myself, and then we could talk about, okay, some things that we missed, and sometimes there would be a line in there that was very, very important for her, and it was very easy for me to be convinced because of she would explain why, and she had extremely thoughtful responses. And then those lines now I see sometimes they pop, I'm watching the film and I'm so thankful. There's no way that I would have seen how important, and now it's so clear how essential they were. So and Lucas did something similar. We also went to the book. In that case, Pat, Lucas, and I went away for at least a week in a cabin, kind of like a trailer in Portland, and just worked on going through the book and through his character and just talking and going through these lines and trying to really find this world and this character. But then in terms of rehearsals, Lucas wanted to have, we had much more conversations about the world. We talked about movies. We watched a lot of movies together. We circled around things and got to know each other and trust each other and really care for each other. And with Michelle, we also got to care and trust each other, but she wanted to talk about very, very specific points. And she also wanted specific answers from me, which is not something I was used to do. Not because she was going to use those answers for herself, but she wanted to know that I had thought about these things and what were my thoughts about that. And I'd come from
sounds really rigorous, this process of her, because part of what's so charming about the performance is that it seems like she could kind of do anything at any moment. The character seems that way, but it has to be mapped out. Something as casual and oopsie as the slinging the knife across the kitchen has to come from a psychologically, her backstory, who she is. All this has to kind of inform that, the way that it just is kind of tossed, for instance.
Yeah, it's so true. And that was something that we discussed and we thought about it, and we'd go throughout shooting. We talked when we wrap up the day, we continued to kind of exchange ideas and thoughts for about what just we went through. And then the next day's shooting, and in the morning before shooting, that conversation would continue, and we just keep going on. And she was she was extremely sensitive, and I was sensitive about finding this line that was both tragic and magical. Like the way that I see this, especially now, this film, I see it as a screwball tragedy, and that is within every moment. That it just is. You can look at it in one way and be horrified about her actions. On the other side, you can be sympathetic, or you could laugh at them. You could have these choices because they're all correct.
I love that description. I also love how, how literary, the book is. It's a slender book, but it's just like, there's so much care to the language. Here I've dug up my notes from, the watching the movie. I found this line about, what a cliche is, which is kind of funny to encounter in any sort of work, like a literary work, a cinematic work, because obviously it's a sort of meta self-aware thing, but it's kind of a fun moment, and it's one of the reasons I just noted it at the time. What's the rest of the line? It's a story
fine,
so fine and thrilling that it's grown old in its hopeful retelling. People tell it, not so many live it. That, if I can read my writing, that's what it says. But it's also, kind of this is adjacent to another genre of, Catcher in the Rye and Igby Goes Down, and, the world of Noah Baumbach, of these kind of, Upper East Side, I guess, or West Side, New Yorkers, from a certain amount of privilege and a certain amount of angst among the young people, and yet I feel like there's so much in your telling that diverges from that. And so there is this kind of, this awareness of the cliche of the genre, of the characters, and also this departure that's kind of going on in your approach.
Well, I think for all my work, but especially this one, I approached them as fables. And I saw this one and those lines, that happens in fables, right? And so ultimately, don't lie or don't cheat, there's these things that people say that you can say in fables. And that's something that it seemed both truthful to Frances, but only if her character existed somewhat in this world that is without cell phones. They don't need time. They're so wealthy that they're outside of time. Like that's how far away from this. And so I had to keep bringing it into the world. So like for example, that scene you're talking about. I mean, she's so beautiful in that scene. She's sitting on that bench with Susan. Paris is gorgeous. It was raining that day. The rain stopped for that shot. Everything kind of felt correct in a fable world. And then you're still looking, okay, how does life seep in? In that case, like I remember that both not Susan Coyne is the actress that plays Joan, her best friend. But we were doing that, and they both wind up taking this sip of their hot chocolate at the exact same time. And that wasn't a planned thing, but it was them falling in sync as friends, as old friends can do. And those are the things that you're just hoping for, that it's not scripted, and in some way brings it down to world, even though it's a magical moment, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's that balance it's so fascinating to me.
It was interesting. Yeah. This movie was featured. Was it the closing night of the New York Film Festival? And that means that I saw it a few weeks before Let Them All Talk, the Steven Soderbergh movie, which kind of does something similar with Lucas Hedges, even right down to a transatlantic cruise.
Yeah.
Just curious, a lot of the audience, because I'm sure they love Meryl Streep and their film aficionados, may actually come to it in the other direction, having seen that film first. How did it work though? Like for Lucas, did he make your film first, the other one, and
no.
was aware of this?
Yeah, we were in rehearsal, we were prepping, and then he told me that he had met up with Soderbergh about a project, and then he was like, he told me, like we're basically going off. The idea would be that I'd go on a ship, and we'd shoot this on the ship for I think a 3 weeks or whatever it was. And of course, as like possessive and everything else, like I'm gonna be like, hey, but he said it's a very, very different story. And it's going to be just a very different experience. And I trusted him on that. And then when I wound up seeing the film, which I thought was wonderful, I could completely see like it's a different story, even though it has this strange mixture. But, our ship is completely fabricated, right? Like it's just a set, and it's totally not, I didn't do any real research on the ship other than watching those old movies and thinking like, okay, this is the ship that I would like to step and create and walk into.
There's a Preston Sturges aspect to even that sequence of the movie, with cabins and kind of life aboard one of these.
Yeah. And I wanted to I think what Soderbergh did is he took advantage of being on a real ship and that water and the ocean and everything, and he did such a good job of taking advantage of that. And I wanted to take advantage of the other. So when I heard that he's going on a ship, it wasn't so much like, oh, we're both doing films where you go on a ship. It was more like, oh, you're going on a real ship. Cool, we're going to go on.
You go on a ship with your maternal figure who is maybe going to have a French exit at the end of the film, but
yeah,
which is true of that film too, but
there's more overlaps than maybe Lucas let on. But we're clearly
the world is big enough. The world of cinema is big enough for both projects, and in a way, it kind of I love the way that things can kind of rhyme with each other, And the two characters are totally different. Here, I think he has more of a character to explore. There, he's kind of support to this experiment with these great actresses.
That's right, and the dialogue. We were so rigorous about staying with it. Like that's what we first and foremost all fell in love with. It was how people said certain things in this book and then translate that into the script. And how could we sell that into this world? That was the challenge. And it was a challenge every day. Those lines were even more difficult than you can imagine to say when you actually sing, because it's like they don't just flow into each other. There's pauses that can then turn you into this way. And I really started seeing each sentence more like spaghetti that was going in and out and tying itself, around each other. And then it would get to the end and you realize like, okay, that's the only way it could have gone to that end. You had
That
to
sounds
go
like
that
an
way.
anxiety dream,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I didn't sleep. Yeah. I had lots of anxiety, of course, because this is, it's odd and it's clearly, but I would say it's odd, but it's not quirky to me. It's odd in the way that things are in this world, in the way that we can see them, in the way that, especially when we can kind of control and hold on to them in our mind after, which is kind of the connection to the film making.
We have to sort of wrap up here, but I want to sort of ask you one more question about Malcolm, because it's the thing, the movie leaves me with this concern about him.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what your reading is on, he has been pulled in the opening flashbacks from, his boarding school and kind of arrested in his development behind, in the shadow of Frances. In the movie, I feel like is from her point of view, but we also are so aligned with him. Where does the story sort of leave him, do you think? I mean, is he equipped to be a grown-up after this, or is there something really complicated kind of in his situation?
I think it's complicated. I do think that he has the ability now to stand on his own in a way that he could never with her. And I think that he will look back at this whole time with her as a limited time from the beginning. Like this is the only chance, this is the only way that he was going to get her, to have her in his life. And it was going to be for a very, very finite moment. And that was the deal. And that it was a lot longer because of his existence, but also this choice was made almost from the moment he was born.
I think of that beautiful scene that you've kind of created between them that children and parents almost never have. It reminds me of in the kitchen of the French apartment, where it's kind of a backwards compliment, and that she gives him. And it reminds me of like Call Me by Your Name, that scene, between father and son.
That's nice, because it was our last scene that we shot before we had a bit more shooting to do in Paris for the exteriors, but it was our last day on that set and before we all left Montreal, and we waited to the very end because I wanted that trust to be there, but also that weight was on all of us, and it was just it was heartbreaking making it, and it was also surprising. When she says that thing like, what did you think when you first saw me? I've never been so hurt in all my life. It's just not what you think a mother would say. But it's exactly what Frances would say. We know that Frances is going to be completely who she is through and through up until the last moment. And it's the conversation, the way that I went about shooting that conversation is thinking, this is the conversation that Malcolm, this is the final gift that she's giving him before whatever damage she may be doing, that he'll get to hold on to and think about. We had this together.
Well, that's beautiful, and thank you for talking that and the ending through with us. And to the crowd, who's here, a movie like this always depends on word of mouth. Now, in these kind of times where theaters are shut and so many people are having to figure out about movies on their own, if you responded to it, pass it along, let people know about it. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. Thank you, Aza, and best of luck.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed.